Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about this MSD Atomic LS ignition system that I got. And I know I said it was easy to wire up earlier. And so last night I actually went through the instructions here. And I went to page 10, which that gives you the wiring breakdown here. So these four at the top are all in this connector. Most of these are in the larger connector, which is probably the more confusing of the two. We'll get to that in a minute. This one here is the big red one that has its own plug that just plugs right into the big red wire that goes to the fuel rail. This connection here, all these go to the wideband oxygen sensor, which also just plugs in. And this last one, the light green one, is the it says mil ground. It's basically the check engine light. If something goes wrong with the system and it logs an error, it will provide a ground to this connection. So you can wire, in this Porsche here, they have a exclamation point they use for a check engine kind of light. So I could wire this to that, and through the dashboard I will know when there's an error in the system. So it's pretty neat. And so let me just show you this here for a second. So this is the power module again. This is the big one here. This just plugs in there, no big deal. You connect these two wires to the battery, the two red ones. This one wire, black wire, goes to ground, preferably a big one. Probably want to connect this to the battery or the engine block somehow. And this can go out to the engine bay. And this powers your fuel pump. So you find if it's a car like this and you already have a fuel injection system on it, you find the wire that runs to the fuel pump and you connect this to it. Pretty easy. Now this one, you're going to say, oh my God, look at all those wires. There are 16 wires here, and 6 of them, I think that's 6, yeah, it's 6. 6 of them go to the oxygen sensor plug. So that's down to 12. This big one, like I said before, that plugs into the fuel rail, just plugs in, no wiring or soldering necessary. These ones are the ones that you need to be concerned about. This is to trigger an nitrous oxide map. If you're running nitrous oxide, we're not, so we don't worry about that. These two go to the speed sensor, which we're currently not running one. I mean, I have one, and if it becomes a tuning problem, I'll probably put one in. But right now we don't have one, so those 3 we don't got to worry about. These 2 big ones, the orange and red, bigger ones. The red one is fan 1, so that operates the cooling fan. The orange one is fan 2, so that operates an auxiliary cooling fan if you want one. My system's already set up with a fan that runs off a thermostatically controlled switch and a relay on it, so I'm not using these either. This one here is a spare, no connection. So that's just about all of them. We've got 3 left. And I haven't hooked any of these up yet. I'm not using any of these. You don't have to use them. This green one here is the tack wire. Also optional. I mean, I want to use my tack, so this is going to get hooked to my tack in the dashboard somehow. The red one is a switched 12 volt key switched, so some place that turns 12 volts on when you turn the key on, you want to connect this to. And this green one is oh, I knew this. Wait, I could cheat. The green one. Green. Oh, yeah, that's the mill ground that we talked about. So this is going to go to my check engine light. So in reality, I have 3 wires I'm going to connect out of this. I'm going to plug this into the wideband oxygen sensor. I'm going to plug this into the fuel rail. And I'm going to plug this, well, that is the wideband oxygen sensor. And this just gets plugged into the power module. You know, ka-choink. And once you get all that done, take the controller, and that plugs in over here. Ka-choink. So yeah, this is pretty simple. And as we talked about before, this is the line that comes from the fuel rails. If you remember, all the processing and electronics are in the fuel rails. So they communicate with the controller via a CAN bus. If you don't know what a CAN bus is, it's a data bus. If you know what USB is, USB stands for Universal Serial Bus. It transmits serial data back and forth. CAN bus, same idea, no different. It's a different standard. They use different highs and lows and different packets for data transfer and stuff, but that's all a CAN bus is. And I got my cheapy Fleabay throttle body, which actually looks really nice. It's a manual throttle body, so cable by, pretty tough to open too. There we go. It's a 92 millimeter, and as predicted, the idle air control motor just plugs right in from the harness. Same with the throttle position sensor, that just plugs right in. I didn't go over the this is the map sensor here. So this is the factory map sensor, and the MSD just plugs right into that. This is actually for variable valve timing, if you were going to use that. We're not. This is the extra, if your idle air control comes out this side of the engine, then you would use this plug. We're not using that. This is the inlet air temperature sensor. That's going to go in a bung right inside the flexible hose right there. And on this side of the motor, the only other thing we got is, well, we got the that goes to your AC compressor. This plugs into the coil pack on the passenger side. This is the big red wire that we talked about that plugs into the harness that comes out of the power module. And this is the CAN bus cable that we talked about. Transmits, allows the computers in the fuel rail to talk with the controller. And this is the crank sensor. This one's 58X. This is the power jumper between the 2 fuel rails. CAN bus jumper between the 2 fuel rails. You got 2 grounds to connect. This is the oil pressure sender, which we're not going to use. Alternator plugs right into the alternator. My alternator has a different plug, so I'm just going to use this plug and cut this connector off and connect it to one of these wires once I figure out which one's the right one. Back on the other side, coolant temperature sensor plugs right in, and the cam sensor. that has a pigtail that comes out of the harness that you just plug in, and it just mates right up with my 4X cam sensor in there. So that's it. If I ever get the engine in there, wiring it is pretty simple. It's one of the simplest things that's going to happen on this project, actually, is the wiring. Still waiting on a clutch before we can get it in there, but everybody's coronavirus locked down right now, so parts are moving very slowly. So yeah, I am pretty impressed with this. It took a couple of weeks for it to get here, but this is really nicely machined. It came with the idle air controller and the throttle position sensor. They're all on there. Came with the mounting hardware to mount it on here, and it was actually pretty nice. So I'm kind of impressed with that. I mean, it was cheap too. I think it was 62 bucks. And in other news, we have removed the vanes from the power steering pump, and I have crimped off the high pressure line, and I cut this to length that I wanted and just put a plug in the end of it. We're gonna have to drill a hole in it or something as a vent, and hopefully once we fill it, we're gonna fill it to right about the center line of the shaft so the bearings can get oil, and we're going to use transmission fluid. So hopefully that works. If not, we'll have to come up with something. I noticed that the later cars actually have a 3-bolt pedestal that bolts on here and has a shaft in it with a pulley on it, because the later cars don't use they use electric power steering, so they don't use one of these power steering pumps. So that's where we're at with this. Can't wait to get this thing fired up. It should be pretty neat. One of the only things I'm still a little mystified about is the exhaust system. Not really the exhaust system. That's fairly easy. It's going to be a single 3-inch. But, and I can get a good, who is it, I think MagnaFlow makes a really nice dual 2.5 inch in, which is what we're going to have coming out of these 3-inch collectors, to single 3-inch out Y pipe that I'm going to use. So basically that'll just go in the tunnel, and then the 3-inch straight back pipe with a catalytic converter and a muffler on the end. But the big trick is getting the headers connected to the Y pipe. So hey, if I was good at working under cars and slicing and welding pipes, that's what we'd be doing. And maybe that is what we'll do. I don't know. That's the one piece of this puzzle that I don't have quite figured out yet. One other thing, well, I guess there's more than one piece. I have the nose panel off here, and putting an air filter on one of these things can be a little tricky. Factory air filter has a pipe that comes through this hole here. It's only about 2 or 2.5 inch pipe, and the air filter assembly sits in here because that's isolated from the engine compartment, and it doesn't get turbulent air from the road or anything. This is all, you know, closed up and everything. Trouble is, it's not very deep, and even with our cheapy filter here, we can illustrate. This is a 4-inch inlet. Yeah, that's a lot bigger than that hole is. I'm not afraid of cutting some of this away. So so maybe that's what we'll do. Maybe we'll just put the air filter over here if there's room for it, or what. But the throttle body is going to end up right about here. So that's why we have that tight 90 silicone hose, so it can come out and go this way. And then I suppose you could go 90 again and through here. You got to go over the headlight actuator here. So yeah, it's that's something. Well, shouldn't even be worrying about it now. We got a lot of other stuff to worry about before we get to installing the air filter. But that's the update for the engine in the MSD.